At the family Christmas party, they gave gifts to everyone. One by one, the kids were called up, cousins from out of state, nieces and nephews I hadn't seen in years. Even Lexi, who was born just last spring, got a box wrapped in gold foil with her name on it. My daughter, Lena, sat patiently, smiling the way she always does when she's trying to be polite. She's 9, old enough to understand when something's not right, but still too young to know how to speak up in a room full of adults. The pile of presents slowly disappeared. Crumpled paper gathered at people's feet. The laughter got louder. And then silence. There were no gifts left under the tree. Not a small one, not a forgotten one, hiding behind a stocking. Nothing. Lena looked down at her hands. She didn't cry. She didn't ask why. She just folded them neatly in her lap and said nothing. I saw the way her fingers twisted slightly, the way her foot tapped against the leg of the chair. That was how I knew she was hurt, and no one said a word. My heart was pounding, but I stayed still. I watched the people around us. My husband's cousins, his uncles, his sister, even his mother, Deborah, move on like nothing had happened. Wrapping paper crinkled. Someone turned the music back up. Lena had spent 3 nights drawing a card for Deborah. She used gold glitter for the edges and wrote, "Merry Christmas, Grandma," in her best handwriting. I remembered her asking if she should give it to her before or after she opened her gift. She never got the chance to decide. I leaned forward to say something, to call it out, to demand an explanation, but before I could speak, Eli stood up. My husband doesn't make scenes. He's the one who de-escalates, who smooths over conflict with quiet phrases and calm glances. But this time, he didn't look calm. He walked over to the fireplace, reached behind one of the stockings, and pulled out a white envelope. He turned around to face the room. "This," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "was supposed to be opened last." The entire room froze. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Deborah narrowed her eyes. Lena looked up from her lap. Eli walked the envelope over to her. He didn't say anything else, just handed it to our daughter and nodded. And for the first time all night, every single person in that room paid attention. Christmas Eve had always been a big deal at the Morgan house. Eli's parents, Deborah and Walter, hosted it every year in their oversized 2-story home just outside Columbus. The kind of place with a 7-foot artificial tree in the front window, garland on the staircase, and a buffet table lined with store-bought platters from the same upscale market they always bragged about. Everything looked perfect, but it always felt cold. This was my 11th year spending the holidays with them. I knew the rhythm by now, who brought which casserole, which cousin would arrive late, and how Deborah would give me that once over as soon as I walked through the door. Her comments were never direct, but always sharp. "You wore flats again this year?" she asked, smiling as she kissed my cheek. "Comfort first, I suppose." I smiled back and didn't flinch. I had stopped reacting a long time ago. Eli squeezed my hand as we stepped inside, our daughter Lena holding tightly onto mine. She wore a red velvet dress with a white bow clipped into her curls. She had insisted on bringing the Christmas card she made for Deborah. She drew a fireplace, a tree, and Deborah holding a tray of cookies with "To Grandma, Love Lena" written in gold marker. Eli's sister, Melissa, was already there with her kids, plus a dozen cousins and extended relatives I saw once a year, but never really got to know. They all greeted each other like one big, happy family. I stood at the edges, helping Lena out of her coat and hanging it next to the others. There's a strange kind of loneliness that comes from being surrounded by people who treat you like a guest in a life you married into. I knew most of their names. I remembered birthdays and sent thank you cards, but I was never one of them. Not really. Eli felt it too, I think, but he never said it out loud. He loved his family. He didn't want to pick sides. I never asked him to. Lena tugged at my sleeve and whispered, "Can I give Grandma my card now?" Her eyes were bright and her cheeks were already flushed from the cold. "Maybe wait until after presents," I told her. "She might be busy right now." We moved to the living room. The tree was lit, the fireplace was on, and the floor beneath the tree was packed with gifts. Boxes in every shape and size, all carefully wrapped with matching ribbons. Deborah always insisted on color-coded wrapping paper to keep everything organized. Walter handed out drinks while Melissa's husband passed around appetizers. Christmas music played softly in the background. On the surface, it looked like a picture-perfect holiday. Lena settled onto the rug with the other kids, talking quietly with her cousins. She had her card in her lap, folded neatly, ready to go. I stayed behind her, sitting on the couch between Eli and an empty space no one filled. The smell of cinnamon and pine hung in the air. Laughter bubbled up across the room. Small talk echoed off the walls. And yet I felt something off, like a ripple beneath the surface. It was subtle, but I noticed. Deborah hadn't said a single word to Lena. No compliment on her dress, no hug, just a quick glance and a distracted, "Oh, hi, sweetie," before she turned to fix the bows on the presents. I watched Lena's face. She noticed it too. She didn't say anything, but I saw her smile falter for a second before she turned her attention to her cousin Abby. The tension in my chest started to build, quietly, the way it always did when we visited. I told myself to stay calm, to let it play out. Maybe I was reading too much into it. Then Deborah stood near the fireplace and clapped her hands. "Let's do presents before dessert, kids first." Eli leaned back beside me, rubbing his hands together. I tried to match his energy. Lena looked up and straightened her dress. "Let's see," Deborah said, picking up a gold gift from the pile. "This one's for Connor." The first name, then another. One by one, children's names filled the room, laughter, ripping paper, thank yous tossed toward adults. The stack of gifts began to shrink. Lena leaned forward a little, still holding her card, still smiling. I held my breath and watched. This was the part where the night began to change. The gift exchange had always followed the same order, kids first, then adults. Deborah stood near the tree, lifting each carefully wrapped box, reading the tag out loud and calling the child's name like she was announcing winners at a school raffle. She beamed at the reactions, clapped her hands when a gift got a big response, and chuckled when wrapping paper was shredded too fast to admire. "Connor," she called, handing a large red and green box to her oldest grandson. Then came Emma, Ava, Tyler, and Jasmine. She even pulled out a small plush-wrapped package and said, "This one's for Lexi, her first Christmas." Lexi was barely 6 months old, lying half asleep in her mother's arms. Everyone clapped and cooed. Lena clapped too. I kept my eyes on the pile. I counted what was left, only a handful. I reminded myself there were probably still more for Lena. Maybe something got misplaced. Maybe her name just hadn't come up yet. Deborah reached for a silver-wrapped box. "Owen," she said. The boy ran forward, took the gift, and returned to his seat. 2 gifts left now. I sat up straighter. "One for Abby," Deborah said. She passed it to Melissa, who handed it to her daughter. Then she picked up the final gift. It was long and thin, wrapped in blue paper with a white ribbon. Deborah squinted at the tag and smiled. "Ah, for Logan." Logan, a cousin's stepson. He didn't even share the family name. He took the gift with a quick nod. Everyone watched him unwrap a remote-controlled car. I waited for Deborah to say something else, to pull out one last surprise, maybe one she had hidden behind the tree. But she turned to Walter and said, "All right, that's the last one." Someone turned the music up a notch. People started chatting again. One of Eli's uncles reached for another drink. A few of the kids began playing with their new toys in the corner. Lena sat still, cross-legged on the rug, her card still clutched gently in her hands. She looked up at me, not with tears, not with questions, just a small, tired smile, one that tried too hard to look fine. I leaned forward. "Lena," I whispered, "did you check the tags? Maybe there's one left." She shook her head, slow and certain. "Number that was all of them." Her voice was soft, but I could hear the effort behind it. She was trying not to make a scene. She was trying to act like she didn't care. I felt something tighten inside me, something sharp and hot. I looked toward Deborah. She was laughing at something Melissa said, sipping from a wine glass, already moving on. She had looked Lena in the eye when she called every other child's name. She had seen her sitting there, and she had chosen not to say anything. This wasn't a mistake. Lena unfolded the card in her lap and looked down at it. Her fingers traced the edge of the paper. She didn't ask what happened. She didn't ask where her gift was. She just sat there, pretending like it didn't matter. I couldn't breathe for a moment. Eli was next to me, unusually quiet. He hadn't spoken once since the gifts began. I looked at him. His eyes were locked on Lena, his jaw tight. Something was building behind his silence. "I'm going to say something," I said under my breath. Wait, he replied. Just wait a second. For what? He didn't answer. I sat back, my hands clenched, heart pounding. My daughter had been excluded in front of more than 20 people, and no one said a word. Not Melissa, not Walter, not a single cousin or aunt or uncle. The silence was almost worse than the slight itself. It was a shared decision to ignore it, to let it happen. I reached for Lena's hand. She let me take it, but her eyes were still fixed on the empty space beneath the tree. The music played. Conversations picked up. A tray of cookies was passed around, but I couldn't hear anything clearly anymore. All I could feel was the burn of humiliation from my daughter and the ache of every moment she would remember from this night. And then Eli stood up. He didn't say a word at first. He walked to the fireplace and reached behind one of the stockings. When he turned around, he was holding a plain white envelope. He looked around the room. This, he said, his voice steady, was supposed to be opened last. The room went still. People stopped talking. Deborah slowly turned her head. Melissa blinked, confused. Every pair of eyes followed Eli as he walked the envelope across the room and gently placed it in Lena's hands. Eli handed the envelope to Lena and stepped back. No one moved. The air in the room changed, like someone had cracked open a window in the middle of a snowstorm. The warmth was gone, replaced by something sharp and cold. Lena looked at the envelope, confused. It was unmarked, just a plain white rectangle sealed at the flap. No ribbon, no tag, no decoration. She held it delicately, like it might break in her hands. "Go ahead, sweetheart," Eli said gently. She glanced at me, as if asking permission. I nodded. My throat was tight and my hands were shaking, but I kept my voice steady. "It's okay, open it." Around us, voices had fallen silent. People were watching, but trying not to make it obvious. Some shifted in their seats. Others sipped their drinks with sudden interest in the floor. Deborah crossed her arms. Her mouth pressed into a thin, irritated line, like someone had interrupted a speech she hadn't finished giving. Lena carefully tore the envelope open along the top. She reached inside and pulled out two things. The first was a small stack of white papers folded together. The second was a handwritten note, written in blue ink. She opened the note first and read quietly, her lips moving as her eyes followed the words. When she finished, she looked up at her dad with wide eyes. "What does it say?" I asked her. She looked back down and read it aloud, her voice barely more than a whisper. "To my daughter, Lena, for the girl who brings light wherever she goes. Let's chase the northern lights this year. Iceland awaits. Love, Dad." A hush fell over the room, thicker than before. Even the music in the background felt like it had faded out. Lena looked at the folded papers again and opened them. Inside were two printed tickets, one adult, one child, departing from Chicago to Reykjavik, round trip, first class. I looked at Eli, stunned. "You planned this?" I asked, my voice low. He nodded, not taking his eyes off Lena. "Weeks ago. I booked it the same night she told me she wanted to see the stars somewhere that didn't have streetlights." I remembered the conversation. It had happened while Lena was sitting in the back seat, staring out the car window. She had asked why stars looked different in some places. Eli had told her about places where the sky stretched forever, where the air was clean and the world felt quiet. She had asked if we could go. He had said someday. He made it now. Lena stood up, still holding the envelope and the tickets. Her voice was small but clear. "We're really going?" Eli bent down to her level. "We are. You and me, northern lights, hot cocoa, snowmobiles, all of it." She threw her arms around him and hugged him tight. Her red bow pressed into his shoulder. She buried her face in his neck. For the first time all evening, she wasn't pretending to be okay. She didn't have to. I felt tears well up, but I didn't wipe them away. I wanted her to see it. I wanted her to know that this moment meant something bigger than a plane ticket. It was a correction, a declaration. She had been made invisible, and now her father was making sure she was seen in the most undeniable way. Across the room, Deborah's expression tightened. She picked up a discarded piece of wrapping paper and smoothed it flat against her knee, like it mattered. Walter cleared his throat but said nothing. Someone murmured, "Wow," behind us. Eli stood up and put his arm around me. "She needed something that wouldn't be forgotten," he said. So I made sure it wouldn't be. Melissa walked over, smiling nervously. That's incredible, Eli. Iceland? He nodded. It's her dream. I figured Christmas was the right time to give her something unforgettable. Deborah didn't say a word. She stood slowly, smoothed the front of her sweater, and walked toward the kitchen. I watched her go. For the first time in 11 years, I didn't care what she thought. She had made her choice. So had we. Lena looked up at me, beaming. Mom, are you coming too? Not this time, baby, I said. This is just for you and Daddy. She hugged me next, tightly, and I held her like she might disappear if I let go too soon. This moment belonged to her. All of it. Lena stayed close to Eli the rest of the evening. She held the envelope tightly in one hand and the card she had made for Deborah in the other. She didn't bring it up again. She didn't ask why she hadn't gotten a gift like the others. She didn't look for one. It was as if the weight of being forgotten had been lifted the moment she felt chosen. That feeling radiated from her. The other kids noticed. Abby came over and asked about the trip. Then Logan chimed in with questions about volcanoes. For the first time all night, Lena was at the center of the conversation, not because someone invited her in, but because something about her had become undeniable. Eli didn't brag. He didn't gloat. He sat on the couch, arm wrapped around Lena, quietly answering her questions about Iceland, describing glaciers and black sand beaches like he had been there a dozen times. He hadn't, but he had studied every detail. I realized then that this wasn't spontaneous. It wasn't a way to make up for something that had gone wrong tonight. He had planned it knowing exactly what might happen. He had anticipated this moment. I walked into the kitchen to grab Lena a bottle of water. Deborah was there, arranging store-bought sugar cookies on a tray like it was the most important job in the world. Her lips were tight, her movements mechanical. She glanced at me. That was quite the announcement. I didn't respond right away. I opened the fridge, pulled out the water, and shut the door. The silence between us grew tense. She turned back to the tray. You know, it would have been nice to know about that ahead of time, so we could avoid this kind of scene. This kind of scene? I asked, keeping my voice calm. Deborah placed a cookie with more force than necessary. Making a child feel excluded on Christmas doesn't reflect well on this family. She didn't make herself feel excluded, I said, and neither did I. She noticed. Everyone did. Deborah looked at me for a second, then turned back to her tray. It wasn't intentional. We had so many to keep track of this year. Melissa's kids, the cousins from Chicago. Things slipped through the cracks. She's not a slip. She's your granddaughter. Her hand paused. I didn't mean... But you did, I said, cutting her off. You've always meant to keep me and her just outside the circle. You've never tried to hide it. Tonight was just the first time it showed that clearly to everyone else. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. I waited for an apology that didn't come. I walked out and left her in the kitchen with her perfect tray of cookies. Back in the living room, Lena had moved to sit in front of the fireplace again. The other kids were showing off their toys, and she was describing a video she saw once about the blue ice caves in Iceland. Her eyes sparkled. Her voice had energy again. I sat beside Eli and leaned against him. You knew this might happen, I said quietly. He nodded. I saw the list Deborah made last week. Lena wasn't on it. I asked her about it. She said it was just a draft, but I knew. You didn't tell me. I wanted to. But I also wanted to give Lena something no one else could take away. Something private. Something just for her. I looked at him. You gave her so much more than a trip. He glanced at Lena, then back at me. She'll never forget tonight, but now she'll remember how it ended. As the night wore down and families started packing up, people came over to say goodbye. Some of them congratulated Lena on her trip. A few complimented Eli for the idea. Deborah stayed in the kitchen, pretending not to notice the shift in the room. Lena came up to me as I was gathering our coats. She held up her card. Should I still give this to Grandma? I looked at it. The gold glitter had smudged at the corners, but the drawing was still bright and hopeful. You can, I said. But you don't have to. She stared at the card for a moment. Then she folded it once, carefully, and tucked it into her backpack. I want to keep it, she said. That was the most powerful choice she could have made. We drove home in silence for the first 20 minutes. Lena had fallen asleep in the back seat with her seatbelt still fastened, the envelope tucked between her arms like a keepsake she didn't want to let go. Her red bow was slipping out of her curls, and her cheek was pressed against the car window, fogging the glass with every soft breath. I watched her in the rearview mirror while Eli kept his eyes on the road. Snow flurries had started again, brushing across the windshield like white noise. I didn't speak. I didn't want to break the stillness that had settled in the car like a fragile piece. Finally, Eli spoke. I hated watching that, I nodded. I know. I should have done more earlier. I saw it coming. I thought maybe Deborah would surprise me this year. She didn't. No, he said. She didn't. I looked at him. His hand was tight on the steering wheel, not angry, just steady. The way someone looks when they've made peace with a hard truth. She made a choice tonight, I said. And so did you. He glanced at me. Did I handle it right? You showed up for your daughter when it mattered. That's always right. When we got home, Eli carried Lena upstairs to bed without waking her. I followed behind him, switched on her nightlight, and pulled her blankets up to her chin. She stirred for a second, then turned onto her side, still holding the envelope. I stood there in the doorway, watching her sleep. A part of me ached for what she had felt earlier. The confusion, the disappointment, the quiet acceptance. But another part of me was proud of how she handled it, of how she didn't let it define her, and most of all, of the way she had come through it with her head held high. The next morning, Lena joined us at the kitchen table with a map of Iceland she had printed from the computer. She asked a dozen questions about geysers and northern lights and reindeer. She talked like someone who had found something new inside herself. Not just excitement about a trip, but the kind of confidence that only grows after you've been seen fully and loved deeply. Later that day, Eli got a call from Deborah. He didn't answer. He stared at the screen for a long time before silencing it and sliding it back onto the counter. She'll probably say it was an accident, I said. She will, he replied. But it wasn't. We both knew that, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel the need to fix it or smooth it over. There was nothing left to explain. Family isn't just blood. It's not wrapped up in obligations or forced invitations or pretending that love is present when it's not. Family is made in the choices we make, in the people we stand beside, in how we show up for each other when it would be easier to stay silent. That night, as I tucked Lena into bed again, she pulled out the card she had made for Deborah, the one she chose not to give. "Do you think Grandma will be mad I didn't give her this?" she asked. I knelt beside her bed. "I think Grandma will wonder where it went, and maybe that's okay." Lena looked down at the glittery edges and then back at me. "Can I keep it? Just for me?" "Yes," I said. "You can always keep what you make with love, even if it wasn't given to the person you made it for." She smiled. "I think I'll keep it in my suitcase." "For Iceland?" She nodded. "So I remember this Christmas. All of it." That was when I realized something important. She wouldn't remember the silence or the missing gift as much as she would remember the moment her dad handed her that envelope and everyone turned to see her for the first time. That was the memory she would carry, not the exclusion, the recognition. She wasn't overlooked, not in the way that truly matters. She was chosen. Thanks for spending this time with me and hearing our story. I didn't share it for sympathy. I shared it because I know what it feels like to watch your child be overlooked, and I also know how powerful it is when someone who loves them steps up and makes it right. If this story meant something to you or reminded you of your own family moments, please take a second to like the video. It really helps more people find it. Share it with someone who needs to be reminded that quiet love can speak louder than anything else. And if you want more real, emotional stories like this one, go ahead and subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss what's next. Drop a comment below if you've ever had a moment where someone made your child feel invisible, or where someone reminded them just how much they mattered. Thank you for being here. I'll see you in the next story. I never thought I'd feel physically sick at the sound of my own last name. The lawyer's voice was calm, almost mechanical, as he read from the will. "To my son, Adam Caldwell, I leave my estate in its entirety." And then he stopped. That was it. I blinked, frozen in place. My heart hammered so hard it echoed in my ears. I searched his face, waiting for him to continue. Something. Anything. My name never came. Beside me, Adam shifted slightly in his chair. I turned toward him slowly, like my body already knew what I was about to see. And there it was, the corner of his mouth curled up just a little. A smug little smirk he didn't even bother to hide. His shoulders relaxed like he'd won a game I didn't know we were playing. My throat tightened, but I couldn't look away. His eyes met mine, and I swear to God, I saw satisfaction. No grief, no confusion, just a quiet, self-satisfied confidence, like he knew this was coming. I felt cold all over. My fingers trembled as they gripped the hem of my dress beneath the table, the same dress I'd worn to our father's funeral just days ago. I had cried through that entire service. Adam barely shed a tear. He stood tall, gave the eulogy like he was accepting a promotion, but I told myself everyone grieves differently. Now I wasn't so sure. The room was so quiet I could hear the faint ticking of the old wall clock behind Mr. Halberd's desk. It was counting the seconds I needed to process what had just happened, seconds I'd never get back. Why? Why wasn't I mentioned? Did he forget? Did I do something wrong? My mind spiraled. Adam finally spoke. His voice was low, feigning something like sadness. It was Dad's final wish. He told me he didn't want to split things up, thought it would just cause more problems. I turned toward him fully now, slowly, like every movement took effort. What? My voice came out smaller than I meant it to. He shrugged. Don't take it personally, Emma. He just wanted to make sure everything was handled properly. Handled properly. The word slammed into my chest like a punch. Dad and I had spoken just days before he slipped into that final coma. He'd squeezed my hand and whispered, "Don't worry, Em. I've taken care of everything. You'll be all right." Those were his exact words. I knew what he meant, and yet I wasn't even in the will? I looked back at Mr. Halberd, expecting, I don't know, a mistake, a page he'd forgotten, some hint that this wasn't real. But he just cleared his throat and continued with the next legal procedure, like none of this was strange. I wanted to scream, to cry, but I couldn't move, couldn't think. I sat there, my stomach twisting in knots, heat rising up my neck, cold sweat building between my shoulder blades. And Adam? He just leaned back slightly in his chair, draped one arm over the backrest like he was settling in for a victory lap. I noticed something then, his fingers. There was a faint ink stain near the base of his thumb, the kind you get when you sign a lot of papers, or forge something. My skin prickled. A sharp, sudden chill shot down my spine. No way. He wouldn't, would he? But the thought stuck. It clawed its way into my mind and refused to leave. Something was wrong. Deep down, I knew it. And no matter how scared I was going to find out what happened. Because if Adam thought he could bury the truth with our father, he was dead wrong. The rain had started just as I stepped out of the car. Not a downpour, just a light, persistent drizzle that made the air feel colder than it really was. The sky was gray, as if the clouds couldn't decide whether to cry or hold it all in. Kind of like me. Mr. Halberd's law office sat on the corner of Elm and Wallace, tucked between a flower shop and an insurance agency. It looked more like an old library than anything else. Dark wood, iron handles on the doors, and tall windows that stared blankly out at the street. I stood in front of it for a moment, umbrella trembling slightly in my hand, wondering if walking in would change my life forever. Turns out it already had. I pushed the door open. A soft chime rang above me as I stepped inside. The scent hit me first. Old paper, leather, and something faintly minty, like the aftershave my dad used to wear. My throat tightened. I wasn't ready for that. The waiting room was quiet. A tall grandfather clock ticked steadily in the corner. Everything was dark green and mahogany. No distractions, no comfort. Just polished wood, silence, and the weight of what was coming. I was the first to arrive, which didn't surprise me. I always was. Early to school, early to appointments, early to the hospital when Dad needed someone. Meanwhile, Adam had a habit of showing up when it was convenient, and somehow still getting all the credit. I sat on the edge of a deep leather chair, smoothing out the wrinkles in my black dress, the same one I wore to the funeral, the same one I almost didn't take off for 3 days. I hadn't even unpacked it, just slipped it back on that morning and hoped it didn't still smell like lilies and loss. My reflection in the office mirror looked pale, hollow. My eyes were puffy, and my hair was pinned back in a rush, like I hadn't cared enough to try. I hadn't. I was just tired. So tired. The door creaked open behind me, and I didn't need to look to know it was Adam. His footsteps were light, confident. He always walked like the world was waiting for him. "Hey," he said casually, as if we were meeting for lunch. I turned my head slightly, offering the faintest nod. "Hey." He sat across from me, crossing one leg over the other. His suit was sharp, dark navy, tailored to his body like it belonged there, like he belonged in rooms like this. He looked every bit the part of the golden child, but I knew better. I'd seen him at his worst, manipulative, cold, always 2 steps ahead of everyone else and pretending it was charm. Still, I tried to quiet my anger. Dad wouldn't have wanted a fight. Mr. Halberd entered a moment later, his presence as stiff as the starch in his collar. He greeted us both with a nod and motioned us into the inner office. The room felt colder somehow. Maybe it was the heavy drapes, or maybe it was just the absence of Dad. He used to fill every room he walked into. Now there was just space. We sat. Adam to my right, Mr. Halberd behind his desk, and me, gripping the handkerchief Dad had left in his hospital drawer the last time I visited. I'd tucked it into my purse. Just a piece of cloth, but it grounded me. Mr. Halberd cleared his throat, adjusted his glasses, and opened the folder in front of him. "As per Robert Caldwell's last will and testament." I closed my eyes for a brief second, braced myself. I had no idea those next words would crack everything wide open. "As per Robert Caldwell's last will and testament," Mr. Halberd began, "the entirety of his estate, assets, property, business holdings, is to be transferred to his son, Adam Caldwell." That was it. I sat still, waiting, barely breathing. Waiting for the rest, for the part where he mentioned me, my name, a single word. But the silence after Adam's name stretched too long. The lawyer glanced up briefly, then down again, flipping to another page. He wasn't going to say it. He wasn't going to say me. My stomach dropped, like I was falling off the edge of something I hadn't seen coming. I blinked. Hard. My ears were ringing. A faint buzzing crept into my skull like a warning siren no one else could hear. I looked at Adam, praying he'd be just as confused, that he'd shrug, shake his head, whisper something like, "That's not right." But he didn't. He just nodded slowly, like this made perfect sense. Then he said it. It was Dad's final wish. He leaned forward slightly, folding his hands on the table, his tone soft but deliberate, like a doctor delivering bad news with practiced detachment. He talked to me near the end. He didn't want things split. Said I'd know how to handle it all. I stared at him. My mouth opened, but no sound came out. Handle it? What did that even mean? Adam tilted his head just enough to appear empathetic, but not too much to look guilty. His eyes flickered toward me, holding that same rehearsed warmth I'd seen at the funeral when he delivered his perfect eulogy. Not one crack. Not one real tear. My voice finally came back, though it was thin and scratchy. He told me he made sure I'd be okay, that everything was handled fairly, just a week before he... I stopped myself. Adam's smile was almost pitying. "You know how Dad was. Sentimental. Maybe he just didn't want to upset you." My heart twisted because that wasn't Dad. He was fair, honest, brutal even when it came to being truthful. He would never leave something like this unexplained. Never. I looked to Mr. Halberd, hoping he'd confirm what I knew, that this wasn't right, that something was off. But he didn't even raise an eyebrow, just kept flipping through papers. Summarizing legalities like this was just another Tuesday. I tried to swallow, but my throat was dry. My hands were clenched in my lap so tightly that my nails left half-moon imprints in my skin. Then I saw it. Adam's thumb. A faint black smudge on the side. It could have been nothing. Printer ink, a pen, but the way he tried to keep it out of sight, it made my pulse spike. A memory surged up like a wave crashing down. The night before Dad passed, I was leaving the hospital late when I passed Adam in the hallway. He was heading toward Dad's room, looking around like he didn't want to be seen. I asked what he was doing, and he just smiled and said, "Just saying goodnight." But he was holding something then, a manila folder. And now, here we were. I couldn't say anything out loud yet, not without proof. But every bone in my body was screaming. This wasn't just grief. It was deception. Something wasn't right about the will, about Adam, about any of it. And I wasn't going to let this go. I didn't care about the money. I didn't care about the house or the shares or whatever else Adam had just inherited. What I did care about was the truth, because I knew my father. And this wasn't his final wish. Not even close. I barely heard the rest of the meeting. Words like estate execution, probate, and legal transfer buzzed around the room like a swarm of wasps. But they didn't land. They didn't matter. I sat still, nodding occasionally, pretending to listen, while inside, my thoughts were a storm. The moment we stepped out of Mr. Halbert's office, Adam clapped me lightly on the shoulder like we were teammates who'd just finished a game. I flinched at his touch. "I know this was a shock," he said, feigning sympathy, "but trust me, Dad knew what he was doing. I'll make sure you're okay." His words slid over me like oil, slippery, insincere. His eyes didn't match his tone. They were cold, calculating. I forced a small smile and nodded, biting down hard on the inside of my cheek so I wouldn't say what I was really thinking. Because what I wanted to say was, "You're lying. I don't know how yet, but you are." I got into my car, shut the door, and just sat there. Rain tapped against the windshield, soft and steady. My fingers gripped the steering wheel as I tried to make sense of everything. The will, the ink on his thumb, the smug confidence, and that manila folder. That folder haunted me. Something about it tugged at my memory like a loose thread. That night at the hospital, he said he was just saying goodnight. But Dad had already been unconscious by then. He hadn't spoken in over a day. So why would Adam bring a folder to a silent room? And then, like a flicker of lightning through the fog, I remembered something else. Dad's tablet. It was old and beat up, but I'd helped him set it up in his hospital room to video call me when I couldn't visit. And a few weeks earlier, after one of the nurses found him confused and disoriented, I'd installed a nanny cam app. Nothing fancy, just a way to check in remotely. He barely remembered it was on. I'd completely forgotten about it. My heart thudded once, hard like a drumbeat signaling war. I yanked my phone from my bag and opened the app, praying it was still linked. My breath caught as it connected. Footage, stored in the cloud, days' worth of silent, uneventful recordings. And then, there it was. The time and date matched the night before Dad passed. 10:42 p.m. The hospital lights dimmed. The room was still. And Adam walked in. I pressed play, hands trembling. The video played without sound, but I didn't need to hear a word to understand what I was seeing. Adam closed the door behind him, checking the hallway before locking it. He pulled something from under his coat, the folder. My stomach clenched. He approached Dad's bed, looking down at his unconscious body. His face wasn't sad. It was focused, businesslike. He pulled out a document. He placed it on Dad's chest, then gently lifted Dad's limp hand, wrapped his fingers around a pen, and began guiding it across the page. I dropped my phone. For a moment, I just sat there, eyes wide, breath shallow. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut and left gasping for air. He forged the will. He stood over our father's unconscious body and faked his final wish. Grief turned to fury. It flared hot and fast in my chest, pushing out every ounce of helplessness I'd felt all week. I picked up my phone, saved the footage, and backed it up to the cloud. Twice. I wasn't going to confront him. Not yet. Not without witnesses. I was going to let him walk into that office, gloating and smug, thinking he'd won. And then I'd hit play. I barely slept the night before. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face. Adam smirking over our father's unconscious body. Adam glancing at me across the table with that fake sympathy. Adam lifting Dad's hand and forcing it across that page like it was nothing. But this time, I was the one holding the power. By the next morning, I had copies of the video stored in 3 different places: my phone, a USB drive, and my email. I even texted a backup to myself just in case. If Adam thought I was going to let him bury the truth, he had no idea who he was dealing with. I arrived at Mr. Halbert's office early. Again. The rain had stopped, but the air was heavy, like the clouds were still waiting to pour. Inside, the office felt even colder than before. The same antique clock ticked steadily, like it had been counting down to this moment all along. Adam arrived 5 minutes late. Of course. "Morning," he said smoothly, brushing a speck of dust off his blazer like he hadn't just committed fraud a few days ago. He gave me a glance that barely registered as polite, then turned his full attention to Mr. Halberd. "Are we finalizing everything today?" he asked, already sounding like the new man of the house. I said nothing. I waited until Mr. Halberd began gathering the final paperwork, the documents that would legally transfer everything to Adam. His hand reached for a pen, and that's when I spoke. "Before you sign anything, I think you both need to see this." They turned to me. Mr. Halberd blinked, confused. Adam's smile didn't falter, but his eyes did. They narrowed just slightly, calculating, trying to read my face. I pulled out my phone. My hands were steady this time. My voice was calm. "I found something. Footage from Dad's hospital room, from the night before he died." Adam laughed under his breath, quick and dismissive. "Emma, seriously? Are we really doing this?" But I was already pressing play. I held the phone up for both of them to see. The room fell silent. There was no sound in the video, just the haunting images. Adam walking into Dad's room, locking the door, pulling out the folder, lifting Dad's lifeless hand and pressing it across the signature line. Mr. Halberd leaned in, his expression shifting from polite confusion to visible alarm. His skin paled, and he straightened in his chair like he'd just been shocked. "Where did you get this?" he asked quietly. "I set up a camera on Dad's tablet weeks ago," I said. "For safety. It recorded everything." Adam's face was bloodless now. "This is ridiculous. That could be anything. That doesn't prove anything." "It shows you forging a signature," I said, cutting him off, "while Dad was unconscious." Mr. Halberd stood up. "This changes everything. We're halting the process immediately. I'll need to bring this to the ethics board and initiate an inquiry." Adam's mouth opened, then closed again. He looked like he'd been hit. That confident posture, that rehearsed charm, gone. He tried to reach for the phone, but I pulled it back. "Don't," I said, sharp. For the first time in my life, he didn't have a comeback. The silence that followed was heavier than any I'd ever known. But this time, it didn't suffocate me. It freed me. I looked at Adam and felt nothing but clarity. He hadn't just stolen from me. He tried to erase me from our father's legacy, but Dad had always said, "Emma, the truth always finds its way out." And this time, it came through me. The investigation didn't take long. Once the video was submitted and reviewed, everything unraveled quickly. The handwriting analysis confirmed it. Dad's signature on the revised will was forged. Adam hadn't even tried to be careful. He'd rushed it, assuming no one would look closely, assuming no one would care enough to question him. But I did. The original will was located within a week. It had been filed properly with Mr. Halberd's assistant months ago, but never updated in the main file. Likely because Adam had slipped in with his forged version just days before Dad passed. Dad had split everything evenly between us. The house, the assets, the business he'd built from scratch. Fair and honest, just like the man I knew, just like he'd promised. When I saw my name in the original document, I cried. Not because of what I'd inherited, but because it proved I hadn't imagined our bond. I hadn't been wrong to trust his love. He hadn't forgotten me. He never would have. Adam was charged with attempted fraud and document tampering. His lawyer cut a deal to avoid prison, but the damage was done. He was disinherited completely, stripped of everything, and worst of all, for him, exposed. I haven't spoken to him since the hearing. He tried to call me once, left a voicemail saying it was all a misunderstanding and that Dad wouldn't have wanted us to fight. But I didn't reply, because Dad wouldn't have wanted to be betrayed either. In the weeks that followed, I moved back into our family home. It was quiet, but not empty. Every corner held a piece of Dad, his old records, his books, his perfectly labeled toolboxes in the garage. I found the letter he wrote me before the surgery, tucked between the pages of his favorite novel. "Emma, if you're reading this, I'm gone. But know this, I've always trusted you to do the right thing. You're stronger than you know." I didn't feel strong through most of this. I felt broken, then angry, then numb. But somehow, Dad saw something in me I hadn't yet, and I clung to that. I've started donating part of the inheritance to the cancer center that treated him, set up a scholarship in his name. It felt right. It felt like something he would have done. Sometimes I still replay that day in Mr. Halberd's office in my head. The moment Adam's face turned pale, the exact second the truth cut through his lies like a blade. I don't take pleasure in it, not really. But I do feel peace, justice maybe, and I think Dad would have felt that too. This experience taught me more than I ever expected, about grief, about betrayal, but most of all, about instinct. Because sometimes the truth doesn't shout, it whispers, it nags at your gut. It shows up in ink smudges, in memories that don't add up, in a feeling you just can't shake. And when that happens, don't ignore it. Even when everyone else tells you to move on, to be civil, to let it go. Listen to that voice. It might be the only thing standing between you and the truth. Thanks for listening to my story. If it made you feel something, anger, hope, or even just the need to trust your instincts a little more, like and share it. You never know who needs to hear it.